On the night I walked into my parents' golden anniversary, I wasn't greeted with hugs. I was told to leave. My own mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't belong here anymore." My father turned away like I was nothing. Then, in front of everyone, they called security and ordered, "Get him out." I had been paying their mortgage, their lake house, even their medical bills for years, over $365,000. That night, I canceled every cent. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 42 missed calls. And then came the knock at my door. I never thought I'd be standing here telling this story. Before I share it, I'd love to know you're here with me. Just drop a hi in the comments or let me know where you're from. I love seeing how far my story can reach because sometimes knowing someone is listening makes all the difference. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If you're hearing my story for the first time, please subscribe. Your support tells me I'm not alone in this, and maybe I never was. The Drake Hotel, Chicago Grand Lobby glowed with warm amber light bouncing off the chandeliers and spilling across the polished marble floors. Outside, the crisp autumn air clung to my coat as I stepped out of the BMW 7 Series, balancing two glossy gift boxes in my hands, a $27,000 Rolex day date for my father and a $20,000 diamond bracelet for my mother. This wasn't just another family gathering. It was their golden wedding anniversary, a 50-year testament to their enduring love. I'd covered a large part of the costs for this celebration. Every bottle of vintage champagne chilling in ice buckets upstairs, every slice of the Italian truffle cake, every shimmering centerpiece, all paid for in part by me. I strode to the reception desk with the kind of confidence you carry when you believe you belong somewhere. The hostess, dressed in black silk, smiled politely and asked for my name. I gave it without hesitation. She tapped at her tablet, her brow knitting slowly until she looked up with a small apologetic frown. "I'm sorry, sir, but you're not on the guest list." I let out a short laugh, thinking it must be a technical error. "I'm the son of Robert and Linda Maddox. This must be some kind of mistake." Her eyes flickered to the side. "If you could wait just a moment." She motioned discreetly to a manager who appeared moments later with two uniformed security guards in tow. His voice was low but firm. "We've received direct instructions. Get this beggar out." The words hit harder than I expected. I stood frozen, the weight of the gifts in my hands suddenly crushing. My heart pounded, but my voice stayed calm, calculated. "My parents will want me here. You've been misinformed." The manager shook his head. "We've confirmed multiple times." "I'm sorry." One of the guards gently placed a hand on my shoulder, the universal gesture that says, "You're done here." "Oh." As they guided me toward the revolving doors, I glanced through the glass wall of the ballroom. My father, in a tailored navy tuxedo, raised a champagne flute beside my mother, her diamond necklace catching the light. Emily was radiant in emerald silk, laughing with someone over her shoulder. Jacob leaned casually against the bar, whiskey in hand. They were surrounded by things I'd paid for, crystal glassware, imported floral arrangements, the very band playing in the corner, all part of the celebration I'd bankrolled. Not a single one of them looked toward the door. I stepped out into the cool night without a word. My pulse slowed, my mind sharpening. If they wanted me gone quietly, I would grant them that. But it wouldn't end here. A plan was already forming. The rain had begun, and a light mist clung to the glass walls of the boutique cafe across the street. I claimed a table by the window, the golden-lit hotel entrance still visible from my seat. The place smelled of roasted beans and cedar. I ordered a straight espresso, no sugar, and set my phone on the table. With a few taps, my banking app lit up the screen. The latest transactions scrolled into view. $44,000 for the anniversary party, $17,000 labeled tuition for my niece Emily's daughter, and $12,000 for Jacob's research equipment. All approved without hesitation when they'd asked. My phone buzzed. Mark Collins' name appeared, my closest friend since college. "Where are you? I've been looking for you at the party." "They didn't let me in," I said flatly, the words tasting bitter. There was a pause, then quietly, "Hang on." Mark was the type who could blend into any crowd. Within minutes, he was inside, mingling, laughing, and more importantly, listening. 25 minutes later, my phone rang again. His voice was low-controlled. "Your mom told people you weren't comfortable in this environment and were too busy with work to attend. Emily Wells, she said, no one will notice if he's not here." I clenched my jaw, my fingers tightening around the small porcelain cup. Mark hesitated before adding, Jacob joked, "You're basically the family ATM." The espresso hit the table harder than intended, the sound sharp against the cafe's quiet hum. "They didn't just cut you out, Daniel. They're making you the punchline," Mark said. I stared past the rain-streaked glass at the revolving doors across the street, watching people in tuxedos and gowns sweep inside. Something inside me shifted. For years I told myself that their endless emergencies, the tuition shortfalls, the surprise medical bills, the sudden mortgage payments were just part of being family. That helping them was my responsibility. But Mark's words sliced through that illusion. A pattern started to emerge in my mind. Every so-called crisis seemed to arrive just before or just after a luxury trip or remodel a new car. The timing wasn't coincidence, it was choreography. The rain outside picked up the sound against the glass like a slow, deliberate drumbeat. I took my last sip of espresso, the bitterness settling deep in my chest. They thought tonight was about celebrating themselves. They had no idea they just set the stage for me. Back at my penthouse in Denver, Colorado, the city spread out below my windows like a grid of quiet circuits. The South Platte River moved dark and slow beneath the bridges. I dropped my keys on the console table and went straight to the desk. The room held that late-night hum. Only buildings like this have elevators sighing in the distance. HVC breathing through the vents, rain ticking faintly on glass. I opened my laptop and pulled every statement I had. 10 years of transfers poured onto the screen in neat columns. A decade of generosity stripped of sentiment. I exported everything color-coded by recipient and watched the total build as if it were climbing a wall. $305,000. I ran it through a compound interest calculator at 5.5% annually, $365,000. I stared at the number until it stopped being a number and became a weight. I started classifying. The roof repair for my parents landed the same month they posted photos of a brand new chef's kitchen marble counters, custom cabinets, pendant lights I recognized from a high-end showroom. Emily's urgent tuition shortfall sat beside her Rome carousel of macarons and museum selfies with captions about living fully. Jacob's research equipment matched a delivery photo of a liquid-cooled PC build and a gaming laptop he'd unboxed on his story with a soundtrack of triumph. My mother's voice echoed back from 100 calls. "I hate to ask you this, honey," my father's baritone sealing it. "Family comes first." I printed receipts, screenshots, and email confirmations. Paper warmed my hands fresh from the tray. I taped them to the whiteboard, stringing dates to purchases notes to withdrawals. A map of the last 10 years took shape. Arrow circles, underlines in red. I stepped back. The pattern was so clear it almost felt basic, not chaos cadence. "Not a coincidence," I said to the empty room. All of it was choreographed. I called Mark Collins. He picked up on the first ring. "Tell me where to be." "At my place." I said, "I'm done playing defense. We're turning this into a weapon." When I hung up, I kept working. I combed through old texts, photos of prescriptions and invoices, scans of school bills every store used to pry open my wallet. I paired each with time-stamped posts and charges. The more I aligned, the colder I got. The temperature in the room hadn't changed, but I had. The pain that had bloomed in the hotel lobby hardened into something else. An edge, a steadiness, a resolve I didn't recognize in myself and didn't question. Near midnight, a detail I'd forgotten floated up like a body surfacing. 2 years ago, I'd wired my parents $55,000 after my mother called in tears about a contractor walking off the job. I found the date, circled it, and then checked the county property records I'd saved out of curiosity. The closing on the Sloan's Lake house sat less than a month later. Back then, I'd chalked it up to timing. Looking at it now with lines crisscrossing the board, it was obvious. The bailout wasn't patchwork. It was part of the purchase. I wrote the words house money beside the circle and underlined them twice. I stood there, palms still dusty with paper fibers, and let it settle. The story I'd been fed for years, the one about temporary setbacks and bad luck, had always been the B-roll. The feature had been running under it the whole time. I saved every file to an encrypted drive and backed it up to a second one. Then I cleaned the desk, shut off the overheads, and left the whiteboard blazing under a single lamp. From the kitchen, I watched the wall of paper and ink like it was a horizon. The river kept moving. So would I. Sleep didn't come. I lay awake hearing my mother's hiccuping sobs, the way a person hears a fire alarm long after it's been turned off. Somewhere around 3:30, the siren inside me quieted. The plan held. Morning could come. It did. Sun pushed through the thin blinds and pale stripes landing across the whiteboard and my notes like new tracks on old snow. Mark Collins arrived with a backpack, a travel mug, and the kind of expression he wore before big deadlines. He set up his laptop beside mine and unfolded a small portable monitor that bloomed to life with graphs and empty grids. "Let's pull the bones out," he said. "We built a master ledger. Every transfer, every date, the stated reason, the actual spending that followed." He ran frequency analyses while I added context lines. What was said on the phone, who called whom, which cousin's wedding or fundraiser or holiday had hovered nearby. After an hour, Mark swiveled the portable monitor toward me. It showed peaks evenly spaced like posts along a fence. "Most of the crises happen 3 to 4 weeks before big social events," he said. "Vacations, upgrades, charity galas. It's almost a schedule. When there isn't an event, there's an acquisition." I already knew what he meant, but he showed me anyway. Emily had messaged me on a Tuesday about tuition. By Friday, she'd posted a Chanel bag with the caption, "Small rewards for big efforts." Jacob had texted me a photo of a past due rent notice. 3 days later, he uploaded a cinematic reel of his new RGB tower with a parts list in the comments. My parents' medical scare had led to me paying $13 to $500, and a month after that they tagged a resort in Turks and Caicos where the ocean looked computer-generated. "Data doesn't get jealous," Mark Collins said. "It just tells the truth." I felt neither jealous nor surprised. I felt focused. "This is the surface," I said. "We need to get underneath." He nodded. "I have someone, Karen Miller. She's quiet and very, very good." He dialed her, then handed me the phone. Her voice was steady, Midwestern vowels dressed in patience. I told her everything what happened at the hotel, what I'd discovered, what I needed. She asked 3 questions that told me she'd done this before. Where are the originals stored? Who else has seen them? If I find something you don't want to know, what do you want me to do with it? Show me, I said. We agreed to meet at a small cafe in Lodo, Denver, with no sign on the door. The barista knew Mark by sight and didn't look up when we took the corner booth. Karen arrived in a navy blazer and flats that didn't make a sound. She slid a legal pad out of her bag, uncapped a pen, and let me talk. I walked her through the whiteboard, the numbers, the posts. When I finished, she drew a box, then a second one, then a third, and started connecting them with arrows that mirrored the lines in my apartment.
"This is not just familial pressure," she said, tapping the page. "What you're describing has the shape of a financial scheme. If I'm right, there will be undisclosed accounts passed through entities and paper built to look like favors." I heard myself breathe. Across the street, a delivery truck hissed and groaned. The cafe's refrigerator clicked on and off. "What do you need?" I asked. "Consent to dig," she said. "Names, dates of birth, properties you know about. Any companies they've mentioned, old emails, screenshots. I'll pull credit files, public records, and whatever can be lawfully accessed. If there's more, we'll see it." Mark slid a thumb drive across the table. Karen tucked it away without looking. "One more thing," she said, and for the first time her tone shifted. "Are you sure you want the whole picture? Sometimes what sits beneath the money isn't just poor judgment. Sometimes it's motive. Sometimes it's allegiance." For a second, the temperature seemed to fall. I didn't know why the question got to me. I only knew that it did. I thought of my mother's hands, settling pearls at her throat. That night, my father's laugh rising over the band. Emily's eyes shining Jacob's glass aloft at the bar. I could feel the revolving door push me out again. "Yes," I said. "All of it." We left with no handshakes, just an understanding that the ground had shifted. Outside, the morning had cleaned the streets. Mark and I walked in silence back to the car. He drove while I scrolled through more of the archives, adding notes to a shared document Karen Miller could access once she was back at her office. By early afternoon, we were at my place tightening screws. We built a timeline slide deck and a summary sheet in plain language. We flagged the $55,000 wire from 2 years ago and attached the Sloan's Lake purchase. We clipped the Turks and Caicos tag and dropped it beside the $13 to $500 transfer. We added the Chanel date and the gaming rig unboxing to the tuition and rent pleas. It was ugly and neat at the same time. I called my bank and set alerts on every account I owned. I ordered a fresh safe for the closet and entered the backup drives one by one, confirming they worked. I changed my passwords and enabled an extra layer of verification that would make my future self curse me and my present self sleep. Late in the day, the sun swung across the room and lit the whiteboard with a pale gold I'd seen the night before in the hotel ballroom. I stood there again, but I wasn't the same man who had watched through glass. The anger was still there, but it had a spine now. The shame had burned off and left something cleaner. When the phone finally buzzed, it was a message from an unknown number with 2 words: "I'll start." I didn't need a signature. I could almost hear the quiet pen, the careful drawers opening the records, clicking into place. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to relief. It wasn't over. It hadn't even really begun. But the story I told myself about duty and patience and endurance had been replaced by a new one written in an alphabet of ledgers and dates and names that would not move no matter who cried. Night settled over the river. I stood at the window and watched a freighter slide under the bridge, its lights braided and slow. When my reflection finally gave way to the outside, I could see my breath in the glass. I pressed my palm to it, and the warmth made a print that faded, then disappeared. "Let's see what's under the floorboards," I said to the room, and the room said nothing back. The silver domes lifted to reveal the main course, a perfectly seared filet mignon as quiet conversation hummed around the long banquet table. I rested my phone beside my wine glass thumb hovering over a single preset command. One press, and the call I'd staged earlier connected. The vibration came almost instantly, not on my side, but in Peter Lang's jacket pocket across from me. He glanced at the caller ID, then slid his chair back with a polite smile. "I'm terribly sorry. There's a matter I must attend to. Please enjoy your meal." I didn't watch him leave. Instead, I studied Robert. He tried to keep the conversation flowing, but his eyes flickered toward the doors. From my periphery, Peter Lang's tall figure reappeared briefly, leaning in close to one of the most influential guests at the far end. A low exchange.
The guest nodded gravely, stood, and began collecting her things. Within minutes, 2 more followed. Peter Lang's hand rested on a third guest's shoulder as they walked toward the exit. Together, voices hushed, but urgent. The effect was seamless quiet, controlled devastating. Plates sat half-finished. Waiters shifted uneasily, unsure whether to serve or clear. From the other end of the table, Monica Reed's voice was syrupy sweet. "Robert, perhaps you can." But she broke off when she noticed Derek Shaw leaning toward her. Their words were too low to catch, but his hand disappeared under the table thumb, working quickly over his phone. I caught just one phrase as he leaned back. "Plan B." I rose slowly, pushing my chair in without a sound, and excused myself to the coat check. As I passed the side corridor, a voice drifted from the half-open door to a service hallway. Robert's sharper than I'd heard it all evening. "You promised me he'd be humiliated, not left standing while our guests vanish." Monica's reply was muted, but the edge in it was unmistakable. Outside, the winter air bit at my face. Peter Lang intercepted me near the valet stand. His breath fogged the cold as he spoke. "You just gave me more reason to see this through, but understand now they'll get dirtier." His gaze shifted briefly to the entrance behind me. Much dirtier. I drove home without music, the city lights stretching in blurred ribbons across the windshield. When I reached my loft, a small, neatly wrapped box waited on the doorstep. No note, no sender. Inside, under a layer of tissue paper, sat a ceramic pot holding nothing but the brittle remains of a plant, its roots torn out soil scraped clean. The smell was faint but unmistakable. Something once alive, now deliberately destroyed. I set it on the counter knowing it wasn't decoration. It was a message, and I intended to answer it. Christmas morning broke pale and silent. The streets below my loft still empty from the night before. When I stepped out for coffee, the front door's deadbolt caught awkwardly on the key. A closer look showed a fresh scratch across the lock plate metal curled up at the edges. Inside, nothing appeared missing, but the drafting table in my office told a different story. The stack of design schematics I kept in strict order was scattered. Paper corners, bent clips missing. In the center, someone had placed an unmarked envelope. Inside were photographs, old, slightly warped from time of me and my mother, years before standing in front of our house in Springfield. She wore the same deep blue cardigan she'd worn the day she told me I'd outgrow that town. No one in Robert's family had these. No one. I checked the mailbox downstairs on instinct. Wedged between glossy flyers was a Christmas card. The message inside read only, "Stay in your lane." Same block print, same angle of letters as the slip I'd found weeks ago. The memory clicked sharply. Monica Reed's grocery lists on the kitchen counter when I still lived under Robert's roof. Identical handwriting. I called Peter Lang. "They were here," I said. "No forced entry, but they went through my things." "Plan B," he muttered. "They're about to tell anyone who will listen that you built your career with Robert's money. Make you the parasite. How I've heard a reporter's already been tipped." Anonymous source, of course. I didn't waste a second. Susan Parker's number was still in my contacts from a landscaping commission I'd done outside her firm years ago. She picked up on the second ring. "You've got a problem," I said. "And if you take the case, so will they." Within the hour, she called back. The phone number that sent the tip to the reporter, it's registered to Derek Shaw's assistant. There's a paper trail, not even subtle. I stood at the window. The dead plant on the counter behind me, the photographs spread across the desk. Outside, the city's hum was beginning to swell again, unaware of the quiet war being waged in this loft. This was no longer about family pride or petty grudges. This was a deliberate campaign to erase me from reputation, from legacy, from the narrative entirely. And they had just made their first mistake. Morning light barely reached the edges of my office windows, strewn with the soft reflection of the skyline. Karen Miller sat across from me. her tablet glowing Mark Collins, leaning on the edge of the conference table with arms folded. Karen slid a series of files across. Part of the trust fund was pledged as collateral for Robert's new lakefront property loan. Here, mortgage documents, lender records. She tapped the screen again. Jacob's been receiving monthly stipends from the same fund for 4 years. And Emily, she's the registered owner of a shell company siphoning funds under the guise of corporate investments. I stood marker in hand and began tracing the flow on the whiteboard arrows from the trust to the shell company, looping into personal accounts, then back into property holdings. The network was intricate but deliberate, a web designed to confuse anyone who tried to follow it. The phone rang. Emily's name flashed. I put it on speaker before Karen could protest. "You think you're the only victim?" Her voice snapped. "He forced me to put my name on that fake company. If this goes to court, I'll drag everyone down with me." She hung up before I could answer. Seconds later, another call. "Jacob." His tone was shaky, defensive. "I thought it was for tuition support. If you go public with this, Dad will be investigated. You really want that? You're sure you can handle what happens?" I ended the call without reply. The cracks were showing in their unity. They were beginning to turn on each other. That fracture could be my advantage or a trap if they decided to close ranks again. Karen Miller's phone chimed. She read the message and looked up sharply. "Robert's about to open an offshore account to move what's left of the trust. Once that happens, it's gone." Mark Collins' jaw tightened. "Then we bait him. Set up a transaction he can't resist following. If we can trace it, we can pin him down." Night came heavy and cold. I was drafting an outline for the bait when the knock came at my door. Emily stood there, rainwater beating on her coat, a small silver USB clutched in her hand. "This is every transfer record and internal memo my father's been hiding," she said. "But I want immunity. I don't want to go down with him." Before I could answer, my phone rang again. Mark Collins. His voice was low. "Robert knows she's there. He's on his way to you right now." Rain lashed against the penthouse windows. The city lights below smudged into streaks. The USB sat in the center of the dining table. My laptop opened, the cursor blinking like it was waiting for me to choose. I plugged it in. Folders loaded instantly. Mortgage contracts for the lakefront property, clearly naming Robert and listing the trust as collateral. A chain of internal emails between Robert and his personal attorney discussing strategies to delay my inheritance indefinitely. Bank statements mapping transfers to accounts in Switzerland and the Isle of Man. Karen Miller appeared on video call, her voice steady but charged. "This is direct proof, executive abuse, federal financial fraud. You can end this, but once you do, there's no walking it back." The elevator bell chimed in the distance, metallic and final. I stepped out onto the balcony, scanning the street below where Mark Collins waited running. Before leaving, I attached the entire USB's contents to an encrypted email, sending it to a secure address I'd set up months ago. I added a single line for Robert. The rules just changed. Adrenaline surged as I slipped into the rain-slick night, knowing the threshold I'd crossed was irreversible. This was no longer about bruised egos or family hierarchies. It was war, and the battlefield was both legal and financial. Halfway down the block, my phone vibrated with a new message from an unknown number that USB isn't the only copy. I looked over my shoulder at the high glass facade receding behind me. Someone else had been watching moving pieces on the same board, and their allegiance was unknown. Robert's name lit my screen in rapid succession, his voicemail spilling over. "If you release that, the whole family burns and you'll burn with it." Mark Collins glanced at me as we merged into the traffic. "I copied everything on that drive the moment you plugged it in. There are files you didn't even get to open." The city swallowed us, the storm covering our trail. Somewhere above the hum of the tires and the rush of the rain, I knew the next move would decide who survived this game. Winter mornings in Denver, Colorado have a way of settling into your bones. Gray sky, damp air, the kind of cold that makes you restless. I carried that restlessness into Thomas Bennett's law office, where Mark Collins and Karen Miller were already seated at a table crowded with open folders, printed contracts, and the USB drive at the center of it all. I opened the meeting without small talk. Here's the plan. First, we file a civil suit for financial fraud and executive abuse. Second, we forward every piece of evidence to the IRS and the Securities and Exchange Commission to initiate a federal investigation. Third, we prepare a press statement to release if Robert tries to smear me. Mark leaned forward. There's more. Hidden in the encrypted folders from the USB, your grandfather's handwritten letter to Robert. It's explicit. Protect the trust for Daniel. He's the only one in this family who won't exploit it. This isn't just evidence, it's motive in your favor. I took the page from him, tracing my grandfather's firm script. It was both a vindication and a challenge. Karen's tone was sharp. We should send select excerpts from the evidence to Emily and Jacob. Let them know Robert is ready to sacrifice them to protect himself. I agreed. Within 2 hours, Emily called. You don't get it. He's putting the Sloan's Lake house up for sale and moving everything to Isle of Man. I didn't waste a second. Thomas drafted a motion for a temporary restraining order to freeze the transaction, attaching the trust fund documents as proof. A part of me still wanted them to step back before it went too far. But another part knew we had already passed that point. That night my phone buzzed. Emily again, this time sending an audio file. Robert's voice, low and deliberate, speaking with his attorney about fabricating a tax fraud charge against me. Minutes later, Jacob texted, I can give you the password to Robert's offshore account, but you leave me out of the lawsuit. Before I could reply, an anonymous email arrived. If you go public with everything, there's one name besides Robert's that will be destroyed, and it's someone you don't want to lose. I sat back, the screen's glow cutting through the dark room. Someone else was pulling strings, and I hadn't yet seen their face. The Denver County Courthouse was packed, the air humming with reporters, murmurs, and the quiet tension of onlookers who knew a public reckoning was about to unfold. I walked in, eyes locking on Robert across the aisle. His lawyer was at his side. Emily and Jacob sat together, uneasy but silent. Thomas Bennett took the floor first, submitting into evidence my grandfather's will, the letter, the bank statements, the mortgage contract naming the trust as collateral, and the offshore transfer records. He played the recorded calls and displayed internal emails pulled from the USB. Robert's counsel tried to frame it as flexible asset management, but Karen Miller rose as an expert witness, breaking down the transactions step by step, proving they were deliberate acts of misappropriation. Halfway through, Mark Collins' phone buzzed. He glanced at me, then at the judge before handing it over to the clerk. The court's projector lit up with a video of Robert accepting a metal briefcase from a known real estate developer, along with audio of Robert assuring him the witness will stay quiet. The room shifted, press leaning forward, whispers crackling through the crowd. The judge's gavel struck hard. She ordered all of Robert's assets frozen and the remainder of the trust preserved under court supervision. Relief flickered through me, but it was tempered. This was a holding pattern, not an endgame. As I stepped outside into the swirl of flashbulbs, a woman I'd never seen approached and pressed a sealed envelope into my hand before disappearing into the crowd. Inside was a copy of a confidential investment agreement between Robert and my mother, Linda. The ink was clear, her signature unmistakable. The realization landed heavy. Linda hadn't just known she had been involved from the start. The courthouse steps suddenly felt smaller beneath me. The battle I thought I was fighting might only be the opening round of something far more dangerous.